Hey guys, Todd Anderson here with another Magic Online video for you. Today we're going to be playing with Brad Nelson's Bant Collect Company deck that he recently made top 8 of the quarterly Magic Online Championship Series qualifier on Magic Online, and he wrote an article about it this past Monday, so definitely check that out before you continue on with the video because there's a lot of information there. Basically, the deck started in the hands of Andy Ferguson at, I believe it was the Star City Games Standard Open in Columbus. He also top-aided the Open before that with an Abzan Collected Company deck, and I think that this was the, I guess, next version of the deck, and really where I think people started to pick it up and play with it and realize just how good it was. Now, Brad has even taken that a step further and has changed a bunch of cards to the deck that Andy Ferguson played, and honestly, I think he made it into a monster. I watched him play the entirety of the event, and no games felt really all that close, except against the opponent where he lost to the same guy twice, playing a ramp strategy, and that guy went on to get second place and ended up qualifying for the Magic Online Championship. So, anyway, let's go and take a look at the deck and figure out what's exactly going on and why things are going on. So, the mana base, pretty straightforward. We have 8 fetch lands, all which can get our Canopy Vistas, Prairie Streams. We have 3 plains and only 2 forests, since we have these 4 copies of Lumbering Falls. This gives us a healthy balance and still enough basics to just naturally draw them every now and then so that our lands can come into play untapped a little more often. Personally, I'd like to maybe cut a Canopy Vista for a forest, but we do need to keep our white source count high, and we'll talk about why in just a minute. We have only 3 copies of Jace Vryn's Prodigy, which a lot of people are going to look at and be like, oh, why only 3 Jace? You know, like, that just seems silly. But in all honesty, this is a Jace deck that doesn't really have a lot of stuff to do with Jace. You know, we get to loot away stuff like Deathmatch Raptor early, and then we can bring that back with you know, various megamorph creatures, but you know, most Jace decks are just chock full of instants and sorceries, but this one, basically, the only cards we get to flashback in game 1, at least, are Collected Company and Dromoka's Command. Now, Jace is still a very powerful card in this deck, but drawing multiples is not really what we want, just because the second one doesn't usually help us all that much. If the first one survives, great, but if the first one survives, we don't really want to draw a second, because we're not going to have that much to do with it. We are technically an aggressive deck, so I think making sure that you know, we draw a healthy number of creatures that can attack is a pretty smart thing to do. So I think this was the most controversial number in the deck, and is going to end up being not the status quo, but I do think it's right. Now, other than that, the Megmorphs in the deck to go along with the 4 Deathmatch Raptor, we only have 3 Dim Protector, which you can also make an argument about, and 2 copies of Stratos Answer. Now, first up, Dim Protector. You know, it's been around for a while now. It's a very powerful card, but it's also slow. This deck has a lot of moving pieces. It is fairly clunky at times, and so making sure that your deck and your draws are not completely gummed up with expensive things, or you know, creatures that are weak if you don't invest all this energy into them. Kind of like you know, the reason why we played 3 Jace is kind of the reason why we play 3 copies of Dim Protector. You know, we're going to draw it a reasonable amount of the time, and I don't even mind casting it on turn 2 a bunch, especially if we have a backup one. So it does get some beat down on, but it is just a 2-1 for 2, so you got to keep that in mind. We don't have Abzan Charm to like put a bunch of counters on it. We don't have Gideon to make it a little bit bigger, so it's not always going to be unblockable, and that's something to keep in mind as opposed to the Abzan deck, where it's pretty easy to put a bunch of counters on him and turn him into a real threat. The one card in the deck from the new set that is important for the early game is Sylvan Advocate, and this card I think was a sleeper on a lot of people's radar, and it ended up being a lot better than a lot of people thought it was. And personally, I think the card is great. You know, when you're on like turn 6 or 7 and you hit a Collected Company into a Sylvan Advocate or 2, it changes how, you know, the texture of the game. It's the biggest creature you can hit off a Collected Company in this deck. You know, and it has applications both the early game and the late game, which is exactly what you want in a deck like this. You want your cards to be good both early and late. We also have 3 copies of Dromoka's Command on the 2-drop slot. This is I guess a concession to just having to have some sort of removal or interaction in the early game. Being able to use Dromoka's Command plus Sylvan Advocate is a pretty big deal. 2/3 for 2 mana, and then follow that up with a Dromoka's Command. It's going to kill most things that your opponent can play on turn 2 and 3. Doesn't kill Anafenza, unfortunately, but I think that's kind of just the way it goes. Anafenza is just too big for most Dromoka's Commands to kill anyway. We have, in the 3-drop slot, 2 Bounding Crassus. This is the card, I think, that was the breakout card that people didn't really understand why it was in the deck, but ended up being pretty good in the deck. In Andy Ferguson's initial list, he had 4 copies. And the reason why he had 4 copies, not only did it work well with Jace Friend's Prodigy, just being able to loot away some extra stuff, but you also got to play a flash creature, in a deck that has Collect the Company, so your opponent never really knows what to play around. And if you always have these instant speed things, flying around, it's really difficult for your opponent to make good attacks. You don't even have to use it, aggressively to tap their blocker. You can use it defensively to tap an attacker. You can play it at flash to just eat an attacker. There's a lot of things you can do with Bounding Crassus that on the surface doesn't really seem like it is all that good. And in actuality, it's not that great, but it is good enough. And off a Collected Company, you can do some really disgusting stuff with Reflector Mage and Bounding Crassus. Speaking of Reflector Mage, this bad boy is the reason the deck exists. You get so much tempo out of Reflector Mage, and this is a deck that can really take advantage of that tempo. I've seen people put Reflector Mage in all these strategies as a defense mechanism, a way for the rally decks to keep Cletus or Anafenza off the table. A way for these like Jeskai slash Jeskai Black decks to bounce a guy so that they can buy themselves another turn or two to get some more flyers into play. This deck just wants to bounce their guy and start attacking with Deathmist Raptor, and it's weird. I haven't seen a Reflector Mage deck yet that utilizes him as well as this deck, and hopefully today you'll be able to see just how good he is in the deck. Next up, Deathmist Raptor, stock, I think, for most of these Collected Company decks. He's just one of the best 3-drop green creatures, and pairs well with Den Protector and Stratos Answer. Ooh, we forgot to talk about Stratos Answer. All right, we'll just talk about flyers in general now, since that's all that's left. So I think currently in the standard format, flyers are a pretty big deal, and that's not something that people I think have really understood yet, since there haven't been a ton of standard tournaments since Oath of the Gatewatch came out. People were really focused on Modern. There were a few Star City Games Opens over the past month that gave us a little bit of insight into what the format was going to look like, but not really how the format was going to evolve and adapt to that. So I think that the first way that the format is going to change is that flyers are going to become prevalent again. Jeskai decks should be playing Mantis Rider again. I think Wingmate Rock is going to come back in a big way, and we'll talk about why he's in the deck in just a moment. But Eldrazi Skies Spawner feels a little out of place. I'm not going to lie. When I first saw it, it looked out of place. But it does exactly what this deck wants to do, which is put multiple bodies onto the table, and also has evasion. The extra mana you can get off Eldrazi Sky Spawner also does some really interesting things, and kind of changes the dynamic of various situations. I would hazard a guess that there are times where your opponent should actually kill a Scion over the Sky Spawner. So if that's ever the case, then I think that Sky Spawner is doing its job. But the 2/1 body that flies is a lot more relevant than people may give credit for. And if you ever hit a couple Sky Spawners off a Collected Company, you just get to do some dirty stuff. And people can't really handle flyers at the moment. Generating 2 bodies makes you a little bit better against removal-based decks, which is great. And similarly, the 2/1 flying body on Stratos Answer is also great, but it also adds another element to the deck. On turn 5, if you get to play Stratos Answer and hold up the counterspell in any sort of Rally or Collected Company matchup against any sort of Jeskai deck, against any sort of deck that has a lot of instants and sorceries, or very important instants and sorceries, and you get to bring back Deathmist Raptor on top of that, Stratos Answer is just very good in a lot of situations, and I think it's going to end up being one of the better cards in this version of the deck, both because of flying and because of its ability. And last but not least, Wingmate Rock. This card, again, flying is really important at the moment. And then Brad, posted about a week ago in our little group thread. He was just like, I think I want to play Wingmate Rock in a Collected Company deck. And we didn't really get it, We're just like, whatever, Brad's being Brad. But after watching him play a little bit with it and after thinking about it for a bit, it actually just makes a lot of sense. Collected Company and Wingmate Rock are two very similar cards. They're decently varianced effects, right? You get to look at the top 6. You don't really know what you're going to get. Wingmate Rock, it starts off as a 3/4 flyer for 5. That's not great. If you get to rate it, it is great. And whether or not you actually get to rate it matters a lot, but it's not that hard to actually turn on rate in this deck, especially with stuff like Eldrazi Skies spawner. So, if you start to put all the pieces next to each other, you start to really get an understanding for the deck and how it's supposed to play out, how games are supposed to play, how certain situations are supposed to go, and the fact that you can play Wingmate Rock on turn 4 after attacking with an Eldrazi Sky Spawner is just great. It's awesome. We don't want to flood too badly on Wingmate Rocks. It is a creature in the deck that doesn't get hit off a Collected Company, and if we're playing against a very removal-heavy deck, having too many copies of Wingmate Rock in your hand is a death sentence. So while we're only playing 2, whenever we draw it, it's great. If we ever draw 2, it's usually not very good. Sideboard, we have some weird choices. This is all Brad. This is Brad 75. I just copy pasted. I've been changing a little bit here and there, but for the video I wanted to just keep his version and let him basically dictate the changes moving forward, or at least let the games we played today dictate some changes for the conclusion. Anyway, 3 copies of Disdainful Stroke, I think mostly for ramp decks, but can come in against stuff like Rally. Dispel, awesome against other Coco decks. Harbinger of the Tides, Irration Cleric. These cards are very good against red decks. Being able to bounce a guy while putting a creature into play is pretty sweet. Third Stratos Answer to go along with these counter spells. Ooh, I don't know what happened. Trying to move this thing. It won't let me do it. Anyway, Stratos Answer goes really well with the counter spells to really hammer the opponents when you have a board presence. You get to counter their thing that lets them catch back up. And Dispel is a weird card for the deck because not only does it help counter their Collected Companies and their rallies and stuff like that, but a Dispel can also counter their Dispel. So it is both the best way to protect yourself from Collected Company while also protecting yours. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're playing 3 of that. And at some point I may end up going to 4 because that's been phenomenally good. We have 1 copy of Surge of Righteousness against red. I guess it technically can come in against black-red dragons as well. It gains some life. It's not great. It's really good against the Become Immense plus Temur Battle Rage combo, but I think a lot of people are moving a little bit wider. A lot more Whirling Outbursts, a lot more Goblin Bushwhackers, so it's not as good as it was, which is why we're only playing 1 and we're not really loading up on it. 2 copies of Valor Stance and 1 copy of Silk Wrap to help out against decks that play Anafenza mostly. Valor Stance can also protect your guys or kill dragons from an Esper Dragons deck. Silk Wrap also good against the Jace Monster and Mentor decks that keep popping up here and there. Excuse me. Hidden Dragon Slayer, the last one, goes alongside the Silk Wraps and Valor Stances against decks with Anafenza. Kill Siege Rhino. Can possibly come in against red decks since it can trade early with a Zergo or something and gain you 2 life, which is kind of cool. So, anyway, guys, that's the deck tech for the Bant Coco deck. Let's go ahead and start playing some matches. We'll jump into a league here in just a second. We'll be right back.